Hello and welcome. Thank you for being here today as we discuss the results of Team Australia's cybersecurity risk assessment. Our presentation today begins with a brief overview of cybersecurity risk management. We will then discuss our current measures for authentication, authorization, and access control, and what vulnerabilities and threats the information system may be up against. We will also discuss common attack vectors, attribution analysis, and present a vulnerability matrix of current and emerging threats. Finally, we will conclude with a list of recommendations on how to address risk. The International Organization for Standardization defines risk as the effect of uncertainty on objectives. Risk management is the continual process of identifying, assessing, and responding to risk. Organizations should assess the likelihood and potential impact of an event and determine the best approach to deal with risk. To mitigate risk, an organization must determine the appropriate security controls to apply. While risk should be identified, it is impossible to eliminate all risk due to the limitation of resources such as budget and personnel. When a user, process, or device attempts to access a resource, authentication should be performed to verify the identity of the entity making the request. We are currently configured for multi-factor authentication, specifically two-factor authentication, where users must apply something they have, such as a smart card, and something they know, such as their PIN. Once a user has been authenticated, we will require all access attempts and privilege actions to be authorized. Simply put, authorization approves or declines access or actions within an information system. We have implemented the principle of least privilege throughout our information system. Access to network shares and other resources are determined by one's group membership and entitlements as set in Active Directory. For example, only the administrators and users assigned to the Financial Services user group are able to access the Finance Network share. Cisco Identity Services Engine is used for network authorization. Once a node has been authenticated, a virtual local area network, or VLAN, will be dynamically assigned to the access port to which the node connects. After authorization, the process of granting or denying access begins. Entities with a requirement should be granted access, while those without a requirement should be denied access. Several models of access control have been developed and utilized over the years. The four general approaches are mandatory access control, role-based access control, discretionary access control, and rule-based access control. Within mandatory access control, there are two popular security models known as BIBA and Bell-LaPadula. The BIBA model focuses on the integrity of the information. With this model, subjects and objects are assigned classification of trustworthiness or reliability. Users must have the same level of classification or lower when viewing, and must be at the same or higher classification when writing. The Bell-LaPadula model is similar to the BIBA model, but is focused on the confidentiality instead of integrity. In this model, subjects and objects are assigned a classification level. The subjects and objects can only view objects with the same or higher classification and cannot interact with objects classified at a lower level. Role-based access control operates as the name implies. The users are typically assigned to groups that handle one or more roles in an organization. These roles are tied to the permissions that are granted to users individually or through a group via the role assignments. Discretionary access control assigns control based on ownership. If a user has created an object, he or she will have full control of that object. The owner can then share the object with other users. Unix-based and Windows systems operate under this control model through the use of access, control list, and attributes. The last model, rule-based access control, is used to automate the process of access control via the use of a finite set of authorization rules defined by the organization. All of the models can be useful, with none being particularly better than the rest. We use a combination of the models in our information system. Without exception, every organization has weaknesses. These weaknesses must be identified so that the organization can take steps to address them. These weaknesses are commonly referred to as vulnerabilities in the context of cybersecurity. When an organization ignores its vulnerabilities, they're at risk of sustaining detrimental damage.
Vulnerabilities can be present within the people, technology, and policies of an organization. An insider threat is an especially serious vulnerability. Sometimes this vulnerability exists as a result of human error or lack of knowledge. Other times it is a nonchalant attitude towards cybersecurity. In the worst cases, deliberate malicious actions manifest this particular vulnerability. Social engineering is a threat that all organizations will have to contend with. Phishing, which uses emails that appear to be legitimate but in reality filled with malicious content, and phishing, which uses phone calls that appear to be sourced from a legitimate call center, are two types of attacks that utilize social engineering tactics. Users that fall prey to the attacks may have their credentials stolen or introduce malicious software into the information system. The technology that powers the information system requires continuous attention and care. End-of-life products are an unnecessary risk. They should be replaced with current equivalent models that actively receive security updates. A lack of or improperly configured security controls on hardware and software creates holes in the information system for an attacker to exploit, as does software that is not routinely updated. Outdated security policies and security policies with a lack of adequate security controls represent a serious threat to an organization. An organization that does not have policies to inform the decisions of the cybersecurity practitioners and to hold users of the information system accountable is asking for trouble. While having updated and appropriate policies is significant in reducing vulnerabilities, they are limited without enforcement. If policies are not enforced, weaknesses and errors are more likely to arise. Ensuring that employees are held to the standards set by the policies is the only way to hold them accountable. To exploit vulnerabilities within an information system, attackers leverage one or more attack vectors. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of attack vectors that can be grouped into 5 primary categories. These categories are hardware, software, operating systems, telecommunications, and people. End-of-life products are a type of hardware vector. These products no longer receive security updates. That leaves them vulnerable to attack when new weaknesses are discovered and exploits are released. Unpatched software is a huge problem in cybersecurity. All software in a system must be regularly updated. If a particular product is no longer receiving security updates, then a suitable replacement should be identified as soon as possible. Operating systems that have not been appropriately configured with security controls are an easy potential entry point for an attacker. While the applications installed on a particular system may vary greatly, there are only so many operating systems to choose from. For this reason, this attack vector is frequently utilized by malicious cyber actors. Telecommunications infrastructure can be compromised and used as an attack vector. While this does not happen often, certain groups have been successful. For example, the Advanced Persistent Threat Regen campaign has successfully compromised multiple global systems for mobile operators. The most frequently leveraged attack vector is people. Specifically, the insider threat is the largest threat facing organizations. Whether through human error or deliberately malicious acts, people frequently provide an attacker with a way into the information system. When a cyber attack has occurred, one of the questions defenders and stakeholders want answered is, who is responsible? Attribution analysis aims to answer that question as accurately as possible. Due to the complexity of information systems and network communications, an attack is likely to create numerous indicators. Some of these indicators may contradict each other. To help navigate through the noise, investigators and responders focus on specific key indicators. They are tradecraft, infrastructure, malware, intent, and indicators from external sources. Tradecraft refers to the malicious entity's methods and behaviors. Nation states and other groups will frequently and unintentionally create patterns. For example, Specific text or numerical strings may be present throughout multiple attacks. Infrastructure refers to the physical origin of an attack and can refer to both compromised and command and control systems. Malware, short for malicious software, can often point towards a particular nation-state or group. For example, the malware could force all domain name system queries to a single domain name system server that is known to be under the control of a particular entity. Intent or motivation can help reveal who is responsible for an attack. Foreign intelligence entities and other groups with cyber capabilities typically have their own modus operandi for conducting attacks. Did the attacker breach the information system and then try to silently remain inside, collecting information? Or perhaps the attacker breached the information system and began disabling critical services. Lastly, indicators from external sources can aid an investigator during attribution analysis. When external sources such as media reports and publications are available, they should be leveraged whenever possible. The goal of a vulnerability assessment is to produce a report that an administrator or engineer can act on. Simply discovering or stating that vulnerabilities are present is not enough. To be useful, a vulnerability assessment and its associated deliverables must identify the vulnerabilities, rate the vulnerabilities by criticality, for example, critical, high, medium, and low, and quantify the vulnerabilities. With this information, action is possible. The knowledge is useless unless action is taken. As you can see from our vulnerability matrix, Team Australia has executed an extensive vulnerability assessment against the Summit's information system. We have detected and ranked multiple vulnerabilities that could potentially be executed and realized as a threat. To ensure those threats are not realized, we immediately took action. Vulnerabilities that could be resolved without disrupting availability of systems were addressed quickly. For those that would result in potential disruptions, we made plans and created maintenance windows to minimize said disruptions to the availability of the information system. The recommendations on this slide will help address the vulnerabilities from the previous slide as well as many other vulnerabilities. We recommend conducting cybersecurity training at least annually. The training should include cyber hygiene tips and how to defend against social engineering attacks. Regular security awareness emails and bulletins can be used to supplement the training. The goal is to keep cybersecurity in the minds of the user as much as possible. Regular vulnerability assessments must be performed. Automated tools, such as Nessus, can help those responsible for managing the information system detect and respond to vulnerabilities. We recommend configuring vulnerability scanning to run at least weekly. Occasional manual review and audits, we recommend at least once a year, should also be performed. Multi-factor authentication should be deployed wherever possible. This will help protect against compromised personal identification numbers and passwords, as they will be only one of the required factors to gain access to a resource. Speaking of access, the policy of least privilege should be implemented throughout the information system. Users should have just enough permissions to perform their jobs and no more. Even users with admin permissions should maintain separate accounts. The privileged account should only be used when necessary, with the user accounts being used for everything else. All software within the information system must be actively supported. The moment software is nearing the end of support or stops receiving security updates, it must be replaced. The same goes for hardware. As the device approaches the end of its life, replacements should begin to be researched and purchased so they can be implemented in a timely manner. We want to thank everyone who attended our presentation today. We hope you have more knowledge than when you arrived. Are there any questions? The content and discussion today were informed by the references listed on this and the next slide. Thank you again for your participation. Feel free to stick around to ask any questions that you may have.